Dear brothers and sisters, may the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you both now and forever. Today, Mark tells us about the profession of faith of Peter. Jesus started by asking his disciples and apostles, "Who do people say that I am?" After that general question, he asked them, "Who do you, my close apostles and disciples, who do you say that I am?" They said so many things until Peter said, "You are the Christ." This is what we call the profession of faith of Peter. After this, Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about this. And he went on to talk about his paschal mystery, his suffering, his crucifixion, his death, and of course, his resurrection. When Peter heard this, you can already see the response of Peter. Peter took Jesus by the side and began to tell him, don't say that. You cannot die, of course, because you are the Messiah. Of course, Mark did not write these details, but the fact is that Peter took Jesus by the side to really rebuke him, to tell him not to not to say that. Of course, Peter was older than Jesus by human age. Then Jesus gave a surprising and a shocking rebuke because it was not just a personal correction. Rather, Jesus gave a public correction to Peter. And eventually, Jesus says to us that we should think as God does, not as human beings do. There are a few things I like us to think about from this gospel passage. The first one is about public opinion, that Jesus' action today reminds us of his humility to listen to ordinary people. I'm going to talk about this more. The second one is about conversation. Our God is God of conversation. He wants to interact with you. He wants to talk with everyone. The third point for reflection is about evaluation. It's always good sometimes to call your children or to call yourself to evaluate yourself, to examine yourself. This evaluation is very important because evaluation helps us to improve. Evaluation helps us to become better persons. Now, Jesus asks for the opinion of his disciples and apostles. Let me say clearly at this moment the reason why Jesus asks for this identity issue. Remember, Jesus was not having any kind of identity crisis. No, he wasn't having any kind of identity crisis. Rather, he just wanted to know how far his disciples have come to know about who he is. He wanted to know that. As a leader, it's always important to ask your subordinates or your followers, who do they think that you are? It's not about identity crisis. Of course, Jesus knows himself, but he just wanted to know, having stayed with these people for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, have they really come to understand who he is? As Christians, also, this question is very important to us because it doesn't matter how many years you have been a Christian. It doesn't matter when you became a Catholic. It doesn't matter how many Bible you've read. It doesn't matter how many sacraments you have received. What is important is, do you have a personal encounter with God? Do you have a personal experience of God? And this personal experience and personal encounter, these are the things that form our knowledge. And without this knowledge, it may be difficult for one to say, I have faith, because faith is a relationship. So it's important to have this kind of knowledge of God. And this knowledge comes through our personal encounter with God. I usually say this: I don't believe in God because of what a pope or bishop or priest taught me. But I believe in God because of my personal experience, which confirms the things people have told me about God. If you have not had this personal experience, when people talk about God, it may seem like people are just, sounding utopic, or they are talking about idealistic things. But if you have had this personal encounter with God, you'll be able to say, who is God to you? Is God your healer, your friend, or the one who calls you to attention when you make mistakes? Who is God to you? So you can't answer this personal question if you don't have personal encounter with God. But my attention actually on this passage is on the fact that Jesus was humble enough to enter into this kind of scenario, asking for the opinions of the people around. Remember, he is God, and He is also the leader of the disciples and the apostles. It was an act of humility for him to have asked about this issue. Sometimes it's difficult for us to listen to the opinions of those we think we are better than. But in the life of Jesus, we learn that everyone is precious. We learn that everyone has something to contribute. We learn that everyone has something good in them. And that's why Jesus asks for this opinion. He asked for this suggestion or this opinion because he believes and he knew that each and every one of us has something beautiful in us. But the question is that have you been able to recognize or to acknowledge or to realize your own giftedness, the beauty in you, the goodness in you? If you have not, then I think today should be the best day to begin because Jesus sees something good in you. And that's why he's asking for your opinion. When we ask for the opinions of the people around us, most times those who are, dependent on us, those who, have nothing to lose, even if we chase them away, those who have nothing to lose, they are usually the people who tell us the truth. If you ask most times those who are really on the same level with you, sometimes they may not tell you the truth. But it takes a lot of courage for someone who is below you to actually tell you the truth. But in the case of these disciples, they were able to say their mind. And Jesus wants us to say our mind. You don't need to pretend before Jesus. It is always better to say your mind because when you say your mind, that's sincerity, that's honesty, and it makes you to feel freer. It makes you happier. So Jesus teaches us today that it's good to listen to other people, especially those whom we consider to be the least, the last, and the lost. There's nobody that God has removed from the scale of wisdom. I was talking with a friend yesterday and we tried to make distinction between intelligence and wisdom. Somebody may be intelligent, but the person is not wise. Wisdom is a special gift from God. It's also the presence of God in us. So, my dear brothers and sisters, no matter how big or great you become, it's always good to listen to the people around you because we become better by listening to other people. Jesus knew himself, but he listened to other people. Do you listen to your wife? Do you listen to the opinions of your husband? Do you listen to the opinions of your maids? Do you listen to the opinions of your drivers, your janitors? Do you listen to the opinions of those you think you are better than? Do you know that God can bless you? Do you know he can communicate something you never expected from someone you never expected that from? God works in mysterious ways. He can use everyone or anyone to reach out to us. But the issue is, are we able to listen to other people's opinion? Or are we like so arrogant that we don't listen to other people's opinion? By listening to the opinions of other people, we will improve. We will surely grow because no one knows it all. Only God knows it all. And since we don't know it all, we have to be humble enough to listen to the opinions of other people. There are things you think you know about yourself that you don't actually know about yourself, but other people, they will be the one to be your mirror. They will be the ones to tell you about yourself. You don't know everything about yourself. But when you listen to other people, they will be able to point out to you the things you cannot and you will never know about yourself. Of course, you can't see your back. Can you see your back? You can't see your back. But your neighbor can see your back, and your neighbor can tell you about your back. So in this passage, we also learn from Jesus that suffering can come to us, but in the midst of that suffering, we should look at the bigger picture. Jesus was looking at the bigger picture at this moment. He was not concentrating on the pains, the passions, the crucifixion, and the death. He was concentrating on the glory that will come from it, and that is the resurrection. It is always good that when we pass through crisis, we don't just bury ourselves in our crisis or in our trials and challenges and struggles and sufferings. Let us also look, beyond these crises. Let us look beyond these challenges and struggles, and we will see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture can help us to endure. The bigger picture can help us to remain resilient even in the face of our sufferings. There's no person who is exempted from suffering, whether you are a Christian or you're not a Christian. But the fact is this, Our attitude in the moment of our sufferings and trials and crises, that's what makes us really Christians or non-Christians. But the fact is that from Jesus, we see that suffering can be redemptive. And when we suffer, it does not mean that we are bad, or it doesn't mean that God hates us. But suffering can also be a way that God brings out the best from us. Look at the gold, look at the precious metals. If you don't pass them through the fire, they will not become beautiful as you see them today. So suffering purifies us. Suffering helps us to realize who we are. There are people who wouldn't have recognized who they are, or the potential they have, or the giftedness that is in them, if not because of the fact that they were able to pass through suffering, through crisis. I am one of those. I have come to appreciate the giftedness in me because I passed through crisis. So, dear brothers and sisters, from the words of Jesus today, we learn the fact that in the moments of your sufferings, just focus on the goal, focus on the objective, focus on the end game of whatever you're passing through. And you will patiently pass through that stage. Life is by stages. This stage is very important, just as the next stage. But don't just bury yourself in the present stage, because the next stage will be better than the present stage. So calm down. So don't be allergic to suffering, as we see in Peter, because the same Peter who said that you are the Christ, he took Christ by the side because he did not understand the identity really of what he has answered. He was thinking that Jesus was a political Messiah. And for him, a political Messiah cannot be crucified, cannot suffer, cannot die. He had this impression that the political Messiah should be like a Superman. And for Jesus to be talking about dying, it was scandalous to Simon Peter, considering his conception, his notion about the Messiah. That's why he took Jesus by the side. And also remember what Jesus did. He rebuked him and said, "Get behind me, Satan." Jesus is ready to correct us because he has good intention for us. Sometimes we always say, "Oh, why you correct us in the public?" There are things you say that need public correction. Jesus corrected Peter in the public just to also correct other people. So, dear brothers and sisters, let us think as God does. How do God think? God thinks based on possibilities. God thinks based on love. Don't think based on impossibilities, but begin to think based on possibilities, that everything is possible with God. Thank you for listening to this reflection. Please do well to share it and remain blessed.